It is Saturday, May 28th, 2016, and the Memorial Day weekend is officially upon us. Welcome to the Whitfield Analysis, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording here at NGC1 here in Southern Florida. I want to thank you for joining me this afternoon, this morning, this evening, or whenever you're listening to this podcast. This week's show is going to be very special. I have a guest coming up later in the podcast for the second half of the show. A gentleman by the name of Scott Jones will be joining me on the program today to discuss the Never Trump movement, conservative unity, and why it's so important to get behind Donald Trump in order to beat Hillary Clinton. Contact info as usual. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, you can do so anytime. My handle is @SamW_NGC. And as always, the hashtag for this podcast is #WA Radio Show. You can call the voicemail line for the show at 941-564-5805 and leave a voicemail anytime. And you can go to thesamwhitfield.com to read my daily blog, find the podcast feed, which I will be changing here in a couple weeks, folks. So stay tuned for that. And much more. All things pertaining to Sam Whitfield, which would be me, can be found on that website. So again, that's thesamwhitfield.com. Alright, folks, we have a very special show today. As I said, Scott Jones will be joining us later on in the program. Before we bring Mr. Jones on to the podcast, though, I would like to bring up a very important topic and kind of give my take on some things before we bring our guest on. Folks, in case you're not aware of the news, Donald Trump is now officially the Republican nominee, and it is time for the Never Trump people to get on the Trump train, because, folks, I'm tired of saying this, but if we don't all band together and unify behind the unity, Hillary Clinton is going to win, without a doubt. Now, a lot of people on the Never Trump side have said, well, just because you're not voting for Donald Trump doesn't mean that you're voting for Hillary. See, when I say that a vote for Trump is a vote for Hillary, I don't mean that literally. But what I do mean is that by not voting for Donald Trump, by staying home and choosing not to vote, that is one less vote for the Republican nominee that could be used against Hillary Clinton and the Democrat Party to even the odds. Think of it this way. If your team were in the Super Bowl, but half the team, or even a quarter of the team, decided they wanted to stay home because, let's say that, a couple of them were sick or, something like that, or better yet, they don't like the quarterback. That's a more fitting scenario for this situation. Say your team is going to go to the Super Bowl, but 1/4 of the players don't like the quarterback. So those players stay home and they don't go. Your team is short of people. So the other team is going to win and your team is going to lose the Super Bowl. Not that big of a deal in reality because it's sports and in reality, I don't think the analogy I'm using could actually work in reality. I don't think that players would be allowed to stay home in case of that. But for this metaphor I'm trying to construct, that's what's happening. Same thing applies in politics. I don't get this notion that, like, somehow if you stay home, neither Trump or Hillary is going to win. That's what the Never Trump people also tend to say, is they say, well, maybe if none of us vote for Trump and no one votes for Hillary, then maybe neither of them will win. And it's like, no, because that's not the way the Democrats work. See, the thing about the Democrats, folks, that the Republicans refuse to understand, we have this thing called individual thought and individual ideas within conservatism. And it's wonderful because we have all sorts of different kind of ideological thoughts within the conservative movement. We have the neoconservatives, we have the paleoconservatives, you have the social conservatives, you have the evangelical Christian conservatives, you have secular conservatives, you have gay conservatives, you have black conservatives, you have handicapped conservatives, such as myself. There's a whole diversity within conservatism, and it's awesome. And then you have libertarians too. You have this whole big tent under conservatism, and it's awesome because, true, we might not agree with each other on everything, but we have a diversity of opinion. We are more diverse than the left, for sure, when it comes to politics and thought. And that is awesome. But it has also caused us a big problem for the past few election cycles because, well, let's just take the case of Mitt Romney and the 2012 election. Mitt Romney, being a Mormon, I didn't have any problem with the fact that he was a Mormon. I honestly don't know much about Mormonism, but I could care less. I've heard that it's kind of a cult religion. I don't know. I've met some nice Mormons in my lifetime, but regardless, there were conservatives who were upset about that because Romney was a Mormon, not a Christian. And I was telling those people to get over themselves, and I think those people eventually did. The group that kind of screwed Romney over was, believe it or not, the pro-life movement, and I have no malice towards the pro-life movement. I am pro-life myself, but in this instance, I believe it was, I can't remember exactly how this whole situation went, but Romney got asked a question about abortion, and it was something like along the lines of, if the mother's life is in danger, would you allow abortion then? And Romney said yes, and I don't think the average Republican really cared all that much about it, but the fundamental pro-life group, they don't like abortion of any kind, even the one in case of an emergency where it endangers the mother's life. And so because of that, they said, oh, we can't vote for Mitt Romney under any circumstances. And they raised a big stink about it, and I'm not sure how they managed to do this, but over 3 million Americans, over 3 million registered Republicans, more specifically, decided to stay home and not vote for Mitt Romney. Because of that, we were stuck with Obama for a second term for another 4 years. And yet those people who did not vote for Mitt Romney, I seem to remember that they were the first ones to complain about how terrible Obama was in his second term. And quite frankly, I have no sympathy whatsoever for those people, because instead of voting for Romney, like they should have, they decided to vote for no one because it went against their morality or whatever, and they couldn't see the bigger picture, and therefore we ended up getting Obama. We have the same problem now with the Never Trump movement. They complain that Donald Trump is not a true conservative, which, let me elaborate on that, folks. Yes, I realize that Donald Trump may not be the most traditional conservative. I realize that he might not be a full-on evangelical. I realize that he might not have the best foreign policy experience. I was talking with someone last night who said that Donald Trump's only foreign policy experience was being a grand marshal at like an Israeli parade. And that's something that the Never Trump movement likes to turn around, is the fact that Donald Trump has a lack of foreign policy experience. But I was thinking about this earlier today before I recorded the podcast, and true that Donald Trump might not have that much foreign policy, quote-unquote, experience in the political arena, but the man has made business deals all across the globe. Some of them have turned out well, some of them haven't. But he's made business deals across the globe for decades. Obama didn't have any foreign policy experience prior to coming into the White House. He had no foreign policy experience. I don't think he had ever been abroad as senator. At least not that I can find. And I don't think he was ever working for a business of any kind where he was doing foreign business relations. So he had no foreign policy experience either. And yet people still elected him. And to me, the fact that the Never Trump movement is complaining about the fact that Donald Trump has no foreign policy experience is a moot point, because it might not be official foreign policy, but the fact that the man has done business deals all over the world, it actually gives him more foreign policy experience, in my view, than Barack Obama does. And people have also said, well, I don't like the way that he wants to censor journalists. The guy I was talking to brought that up last night too. And I kind of understand that. He wants to make sure, Donald Trump said that he wants to, keep a closer eye on journalists, and that had a lot of people freaking out. But from what I've gathered, and I went back and I listened to what Trump said, and what Trump basically said is he wants to keep journalists from lying and slandering people like they have in the traditional news media. Because the left has a particularly nasty habit, the mainstream media has a particularly nasty habit of slamming people and making just completely ludicrous stories that ruin people's lives, potentially. You remember the Rolling Stone magazine article about the girl that got raped, and then it turned out that the rape story was a hoax, but yet because of that fraternity, a lot of those young men were, they were rejected from jobs because that rumor had been floating around. And that was the media's fault. And Donald Trump wants to just make sure that slander is a lot harder to get away with. I mean, I go back and forth on that point, but bottom line, I really don't see why Never Trump is still valid at this point. And as Scott Jones will point out in our interview, the Never Trump movement is declining rapidly. Now, do you really want a career politician, not only a career politician, but a lying career politician like Hillary Clinton, who lied her way to the top of politics, lied when she was a lawyer and allowed a convicted child molester to get off scot-free? More recently, let's talk about Benghazi. It's been speculated that she lied about Benghazi, and there's pretty damn conclusive evidence now that's been coming out that she's been lying about her email servers too. In fact, this latest round of investigation, we're being told that she's going to be under indictment, which, folks, in all honesty, don't hold your breath. I don't think she's going to get indicted at this point. But I do think that these documents that have come out this previous week will hurt her a ton. And before we go on to our interview with Scott Jones, I do want to ask you, real quick, Donald Trump on his worst day is a sleazy billionaire guy who's not very nice, who's rude to people, essentially. Okay? He's not perfect. But would you rather have a guy who at the end of the day is just an asshole, or would you rather have a master manipulating, sociopathic, lying, manipulating politician like Hillary Clinton? The choice is really simple to me, folks, and, well, I understand that we have freedom to vote or not to vote, but I'm hoping that more of you will join our side on the Trump train and help to make America great again. That's all I have to say about this topic. Let's listen to the interview with Scott Osborne. He's a great guy, and thank you for listening. It's going to be a great show. Let's hit it. Alright, folks, this is a very special treat for me. Joining me now is Mr. Scott Jones from Pissed Off Politically Speaking Radio on the 4-5 Radio Network. I've been following Scott. He and I have known each other for a couple of years on Twitter, and we've been exchanging emails and tweets and Facebook messages a lot over the past year. I'm a big fan of his work, and he's a big fan of my work. And we both decided to come together today, and I wanted to talk to him. He and I are both pissed off politically speaking, at the fact that the GOP, the establishment GOP, seems to, even now, have a hard-on against Donald Trump, and we're still seeing a lot of Never Trump propaganda out there, even though Trump has, according to the news yesterday, Thursday when I'm recording this, clinched the GOP nominee. Honestly, I'm a little surprised that Scott is on the Trump train, but I'm happy to have him along. You can follow him on Twitter at Pops Radio. So, Scott, I want to thank you for joining us on the Whitfield Analysis. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I really appreciate you having me on. And what you say is true. I've followed you. It's been over 2 years, and I like the fresh perspectives and all of that. You might want to call this the old fart special edition of the Whitfield Analysis, but I'm real honored to be on.
Believe me, I've had guests older on than you, so believe it or not. So. We'll just call this the Trump Train edition, Volume 1. So, Scott, one thing that really kind of, as I just mentioned before, that really kind of fascinated is if anyone kind of looks at your page and looks at your show, you tend to have the appearance and somewhat of a manner of an establishment type conservative.
Right.
But yet you have come out as a Trump supporter, and as a result, and this is really when I started becoming interesting, you and I talked about this off air, but you and I have both actually lost friends and I guess now former colleagues among conservative media because of our support of Donald Trump. So talk a little bit about kind of your background just in general.
Yeah.
And then why do you like, what's your whole position on Trump and why do you like him so much?
Well, let me be real clear, and I think I told you this offline, and if I haven't, I apologize. My first choice for the GOP nomination lost, and I actually supported someone else.
Who was that?
I was Team Rubio, and I lost friends starting before Trump even clinched the nomination, and everybody dropped out. I mean, the Cruz people hated the Rubio people hated the Cruz people, and you know something, Sam? If this were a traditional presidential cycle, the Democrats would be licking their chops and clenching their hands and so excited to see all of us in the GOP side eating each other. In fact, it would be a prescription for losing an election if they had any type of candidate that wasn't A, under average, and B, about to be under indictment. And, Trump, he was in my top 5 or whatever, but here's where I come down. And, you talked about the appearance I had of being an establishment. And, I worked for Ronald Reagan. I worked for George H.W. Bush. I worked for George W. Bush. In fact, I was George W. Bush's appointee as chairman of the Texas Department of Transportation when he was governor here. And I would consider myself mainstream Republican back in the day, not necessarily establishment, but after Romney lost in 2012, I came to the realization that some things people say about the GOP occasionally is that we're the stupid party. And now with all of this Never Trump crap, it's kind of confirmed to me that the quote unquote establishment you reference are just not smart people.
Right.
We continue to get beat like ugly stepchildren at a family reunion. And, I'm tired of losing. And Trump my position on Trump, and I wouldn't say I was on the Trump train. I think I've been more hit by it than riding on it. But I really feel like that anybody who doesn't support Donald Trump at this point is a half vote or a full vote, depending on what state you're in, for Hillary Clinton. And she's a freaking criminal. And I just can't stand by as a Republican and watch that happen. And I'll wrap it up this way. It's real tough being a Republican today on Twitter that you referenced, because I tell people that I'm going to vote straight GOP, which I've done pretty often, okay? And that includes whoever the Republican nominee is for president. And I've had people from ages 17 to 70 tell me, because I'm voting straight GOP, which I've done most of my life, mind you, that I have no morals. And that just flies all over me.
Yeah. I'm in the exact same boat that you're in. It's funny that you brought up Marco Rubio, because I'm not sure if I told you this either, but I was also, for Marco Rubio before I, kind of got hit by the Trump trade. And I'll tell you,
I did not know that.
Yeah, I was a big Marco Rubio supporter, as you were. But for me, I think one of the things that really kind of irritated me was from the beginning of this election cycle. In fact, at the beginning of last year in 2015, when this stuff was kind of getting started, I had said that I will support whoever the candidate is. There's that very famous quote from Andrew Breitbart, which I have pinned to the top of my Twitter feed, where he says, I will support whoever the nominee is, because if we don't, we lose. And we saw
Can I interject something right there, Sam?
Sure.
Because it's an important point. He's not the only one who said he would support the GOP nominee. All 16 of those who were vanquished by Donald Trump said the same thing, but it gets even better. They signed a freaking pledge that they wouldn't run third party and wouldn't run against the ultimate nominee and would support the ultimate nominee. And I don't know if you caught my show last week. I had a special report anchor Brett Baer on, and he's a hard news guy, so I don't try to corner him on editorial things, but I asked him the question, does signing that pledge, shouldn't that mean something? And if you break it, shouldn't that reflect on the individual who broke it? And he said yes.
Well, that's a good point. And that reminds me of something else. You and I don't know if you remember, but there was that controversy last summer. I remember talking about this on Twitter with you and a couple other people, I think, of people were getting upset because they weren't sure whether Donald Trump was going to sign that same pledge. And they were like, well, if Donald doesn't sign that pledge, then, we can't have him. He finally did sign the pledge, and, everyone was kind of like, oh, okay. But then, like you said, so there was a big controversy over whether he would sign the pledge or not. He did, like he was supposed to, and yet people are...
And everybody has been wrong about Donald Trump at every term in the pundit class. I mean, you look at, I mentioned calling the GOP the stupid party. In my mind, and you and I have talked about this, Sam, this Never Trump movement. I mean, it's a diminishing entity at this point. But when you look at Eric Erickson and Bill Kristol and Ben Shapiro and all of these people, they are the poster children for the stupid party right now, which is what I think the GOP is, because they still apparently don't get it. The voting public, and that includes the broader GOP, people like you and me, don't care about your platform and GOP defined principles and party and the party brand. If I hear or see people talk about or whining about, oh, woe is me, the GOP party brand is going to die under Trump, I think I will projectile vomit, because people don't care about the party. They're voting for the man.
Right. And the other thing that really kind of drives me crazy is, kind of going along with what you were saying of people criticizing you of not having any principles. And I've gotten the same responses too, only in kind of a different response. I've gotten comments from older Never Trump conservatives who have said, "Oh, well, you have no principles because you're young and this is your first election voting." And that to me is, kind of doubly insulting because true, this is my first election where I've, been able to actually vote for real. But I've been, in political commentary since I was 13 in 2008. So I've been at this for, 8.5, 9 years, almost a decade. And it really irritates me that all these people are saying, "Oh, well, you need to vote for your principles." My principles, true, Donald Trump might not fit every single one of them, but no candidate is. And to me, all of these people talking about, voting principles and voting your conscience, at the end of the day, no candidate is going to be perfect, but Hillary Clinton violates every single one of my principles, more so than Donald Trump on his worst day does. And I don't get why the Never Trump movement doesn't get that.
Well, Sam, the Clintons as a entity have done things that if it were you and I, we would already be in jail awaiting trial. That's just the fact. And, early on in the GOP race, I was very attracted to the positions of Carly Fiorina because she talked extensively about the political ruling class. And it finally dawned on me, and look, I'm not saying this for ego, but think about this for a minute. Just bear with me. I worked directly with Ronald Reagan. I don't mean on paper. I mean standing across from him, looking him in the face and speaking to him. George W. Bush. I had the highest level of Secret Service civilian clearance that you can get in the country. I've been there, done that. On the volunteer side, I have given money. I have worked on staffs of governors and spent my life in the GOP trenches, as it were, starting with the Reagan Revolution, okay? And I know I'm old enough to be your dad, but think about it from my perspective, and you were witness to this, and I don't want to name names right now, but put yourself in my position where you say to somebody who you've known for 3.5 years on Twitter that you're voting straight GOP, and if that includes Donald Trump, so be it. And to have an 18-year-old snot nose tell me it wasn't a principled argument, told me I had no morals. Okay. Now, mind you, this person was an embryo when I was halfway through that career I just cited to you, and telling me that I have no morals because I exercise my right to support the GOP nominee for president this cycle. I mean, it just flew all over me.
Yeah, I understand that. And, you and I have talked, I've had encounters with the same individual and people like him / her, who they react emotionally. I mean, I think the whole thing with that is the Never Trump movement is idealistic. They'd like to believe that everyone is a straight, narrow conservative, but the truth is we need to broaden the party, and
That's right.
Now, let me ask you this, because you brought up the fact that you worked, with President Reagan, and this is something that the Never Trump movement has been driving me crazy with, specifically with the Ted Cruz contingent of the Never Trump movement. The Ted Cruz contingent has tried to make Ted look like the next Ronald Reagan. And from my point of view, Scott, I wasn't alive in the 80s. I was born in 95. I have a deep respect for President Reagan from a historical point of view. I believe that he was one of the greatest presidents of all time, if not the greatest president of all time. I have deep respect for the man. However, I also recognize that the scenarios that President Reagan was having to deal with back in the 1980s are far different from events that are taking place in 2016. And when people say we need another Ronald Reagan, I'm kind of like, well, but Ronald Reagan's been dead for, 30 years. I don't want another Ronald Reagan. I want someone who is equipped to, deal with today's issues. So what do you think of the kind of the deification of President Reagan that some of these conservatives have?
Well, number one, a lot of them are ignorant of the history, the real history of Ronald Reagan, and I'll address that in a second. But he was a great president of all the presidents, and in modern times, he will go down as one of the greats. His policy turned around a deep, deep recession. We had stagflation. I remember being a teenager, I'm dating myself here, and having the gas lines when I was in high school because of the OPEC and all of that. And it was just the misery index under Jimmy Carter as the 1980 election came along was just staggering, okay? But here's what those same people, and when named Ben Shapiro and all that amongst those Never Trump group that are flagellating themselves about we need another Ronald Reagan. Well, they weren't even born then either, or they were, still crapping their diapers. Okay. Ronald Reagan faced the nearly exact same zealots and anti-nomination forces that Donald Trump is facing right now. I mean, if you're honest and go back and look at the history, Ronald Reagan was not the establishment choice for president in the 1980 election, and it was crazy. And people were just vehemently against him. They called him Ronald Reagans because he was going to bring us to war. He was going to build a military. And if Ronald Reagan was elected, World War III would ensue because he's pro-military, pro-intervention. I mean, all of the same, vitriol that we see against Trump now was against Ronald Reagan when he first ran for office. He didn't become a great president in people's eyes until late first term and the beginning of the second term. So people have in that GOP Never Trump group, and Crystal's old enough to know, and some of the others, there's selective memories on that. And Ronald Reagan wasn't the GOP hero when he first ran for office in 1980. In fact, George H.W. Bush was the establishment choice, but he won. And I see some real parallels here, Sam, in what Trump is going through. Now, is Trump a Ronald Reagan? History is, we'll have to wait for that to be written. Is he better than Hillary frickin' Clinton? You're damn right he is.
I think that's very interesting. that you're drawing the parallels. Between Reagan and Trump. And you do bring up a good point. With that. With the comparison.
A little bit of a history lesson,
Yeah. I think it's always helpful, though. And the other thing that you didn't mention that I've researched, because I've read, I read one of Reagan's biographies. A lot of people forget, too, that he also was a Hollywood liberal celebrity, much like Donald Trump was, back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And so, all these kind of Reagan praisers who are now dissing on Trump, it's like, well, have you actually read Reagan's history? And a lot of them haven't. So now with Trump being the nominee for sure, how do you think we can unite the GOP to face off against Hillary? Because, as you've said before on your YouTube channel, and as I've said, this is not going to be a pretty election at all.
No, it's not.
And unfortunately, people say that Hillary, is under indictment, but, that she's close to being under indictment, but they've been saying that for the last 6 times. And at this point, I'm like, I would like to think that she's going to be indicted, but at this point,
she's not, Sam. She's not going to get indicted. She's going to be protected
right.
politically. But the report that came out yesterday from the Inspector General of the State Department on her use of that personal server, to me, the growing call. I mean, I don't know. I switch over and see how the other side live every once in a while on MSNBC.
Right.
Yesterday on Morning Joe with Miss Uber Liberal Mika Brzezinski, and that roundtable was the most devastating 9 minutes of a Democratic candidate or nominee for the Democrat Party in a presidential election that I've ever seen. All of them. Mika was almost ready to cry, and she's like, "Why, Hillary? Why do you keep on lying like this?" She lied after the report came out. Her spokesperson, Brian Fallon, went on network news and lied again. And the report clearly shows actionable violations of not only rules, but laws. And it's put the FBI in a tough situation. But do I think she's going to be indicted, perp walked, and tried? No. But I think, Sam, and this is just food for thought, I think that IG report plus a scathing report from the FBI that just goes short of indicting her, I think could mortally wound her this election cycle.
I completely agree. I think you're right. And the other thing is millennials hate Hillary. I mean, even the Democrats, all the millennial Democrats I know, either like Bernie or they've come over to the Trump side. I have not seen. Well, I take that back. I know one gal who I used to go to high school with that likes Hillary, but even she is starting to.
Well, I've got some hard data for you. A poll just came out yesterday that quantifies that 28% of those supporting Bernie Sanders said there is no way that they will vote for Hillary Clinton in the general. Now, that may not sound like a large number, but I think it's huge. And real quickly, I wanted to answer the question you actually asked me about coalescing the GOP. I think that's happening anyway. There is a percentage of the GOP, the hardcore Bill Kristols. And by the way, I think you saw my tweet. I think you retweeted it about Bill Kristol. My position on him is never has one man been so wrong about so much so often than Bill frickin' Kristol. And I put Stuart Stevens, the failed strategist for Mitt Romney, and all these bedwetters that are whining about the GOP brand. There's a section of that that I think is not going to come around. But I think there are other expansions, and you kind of alluded it to earlier, Sam, about growing the party. There's a sector of voters that either never voted before or were independents or, what did Nixon call it, the silent majority. I think those will compensate for the drop-off of these hardcore GOPers who say they won't vote for Trump.
I sure hope you're right. I mean, the way I see it, we need all hands on deck because Hillary might not be super popular, but the one thing about the Clintons is they play dirty, as you know, and as all of us know. So
yeah, but the difference this time, we've got a candidate with a set of balls that'll punch him back, and he doesn't care if she's a woman.
I kind of have to admit I'm actually looking forward to that debate just to see them try and it's going to be
must-see TV, Sam.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't miss it.
Yeah, it's going to be like watching a boxing match, but instead of it being staged like most of those events are, it's going to be real and punch for punch. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I want to add to what you said. My comment, you're hesitating about him being able to make up the GOP drop off with new voters and expanded base. I will say, and I'm not delusional, I'm a very pragmatic guy. My concerns about Donald Trump electorally are his numbers with women. I don't think they're as high as he claims, and certainly with Hispanics. But, if you've been in the front lines like me, 6 to 8 months in an election is a lifetime. And
right.
But your point is well taken. If you just look at the map, the way America is and where the populations and the electoral college votes are, GOP starts off at a disadvantage because of the population centers. The urban voters tend to trend Democrat, and we start handicapped on this thing. So a lot of things have to go right, and I hope people don't get complacent and Trump loses momentum closer to the election, because a lot of things are going to have to go right for him to get it.
Well, and I have to tell you something very interesting too about the electoral map. This might not mean much to you. I think it will, but this is fascinating. I was in New York City about 2 weeks ago. I went there for vacation with my mother for Mother's Day weekend, and then we spent the week there. I've been to New York probably 7 times within my lifetime, and I love it. I know that Manhattan is very liberal, but I have to tell you, a couple of the local New Yorkers, they actually asked us what we thought of Trump, and one of the people that we ran into, there was this couple that we were sitting across the booth from them at this old diner, and they started chatting with us. And the wife asks us what we think of Donald Trump. Now, at this point, Rubio was out, so I was like, well, Trump's my guy. I love him. And I was expecting it to get chewed out. I was thinking, oh, okay, New York liberal, I'm going to get my ass chewed out. She proceeds to tell me that Donald Trump might not be the nicest guy, but that she really respects him and that she really loves him and what he's standing for beating back the political correctness, and that a lot of New Yorkers feel the same way.
Yeah. Well, you know what, guys? He's not running for roommate. He doesn't have to be the nicest guy.
Right. I thought that was interesting, and that a city so liberal as New York, that I ran into a bunch of New Yorkers who said, yeah, I like Donald Trump. So, I mean, who knows? New York.
Well, although anecdotal, it's encouraging to hear that, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's anecdotal, but like I said, New York, California, you would never hear, people even saying anecdotally that they like a Republican like they do. So I'm encouraged by that, even if it's anecdotal. And the other thing that you touched on, and she brought this up too when I was talking to her, I think the urban, like New York and LA and the big cities, unfortunately, they'll go to the left. But if you go to, the more suburbia areas like, Queens and whatnot, they tend to vote pretty conservative from what.
Yeah. And of course, upstate New York is much more conservative than Manhattan.
Right. And same within, California too, from my understanding. So.
Well, before we wrap up, Sam, I'd like to make one comment about folks like you and in your age group. A lot in your age group look at people my age as the grumpy old get off my lawn type guys, and I think millennials get a bad rap. I ran a multi-million-dollar company and have hired my share of millennials. And for the record, just for your listeners, which I'm sure skew more to your age, I'm one of those that find the millennial generation fascinating. And when I find people like yourself and others in that age group, I'm encouraged because I see more and more in your age group that were tagged, and I think wrongly so, as uber liberal, gravitating to more independent, libertarian, or conservative kind of philosophies. And, that kind of gives me hope here in my middle age and looking forward that there are folks out there like yourself that don't drink the liberal Kool-Aid that is served by the bucket in our college system and are independent thinkers. So kudos to you and those like you who gravitate toward that. It gives me hope for the future, but I am fascinated by the millennial generation, just for the record.
Well, thank you, sir. And, I have something, similar to say about, your generation. And it's interesting because I actually have a lot of friends who are, more in your age group. And it's because, I have tons of friends who are millennials and they're conservatives, but I think there are lots of millennial conservatives who also get along with older, generations like you, because we're sick of being surrounded by all this progressive narrative that is, forced down our throats by, the public education system and then, by college. And it's also, it's in our media too, in our TV shows and in our movies. And so, a lot of millennials actually really like people who are, from the baby boomer generation and from even the greatest generation. So, Well,
in a bygone age, it was pretty accepted, Sam, that younger people could learn a few things from older people. That I've been so lucky to have so many great mentors, starting in, my early 20s, and then the opportunity to work for Ronald Reagan and other presidents, and getting into that. That opportunity all came from people who took me under the wing and mentored me, and that were from the generation before me. And, I feel like and I've talked about this offline, I'm willing to share knowledge with anyone who's willing to accept it. But those that start throwing rocks at it and dust and leaves like a bunch of rabid monkeys, I have no time or patience for.
Right. And, like I said, I really appreciate the advice, and mentorship that you've given me over the past.
Hey, it's free, man.
Years. So, yeah, so thanks for that. Well, anyway, sir, I want to thank you for coming on the show, and hopefully I'll be able to go on your show sometime. And
you bet.
I'd love to have you on again here sometime. So take care.
For you, Sam, anytime.
Real quick before we go, where can we find you again online, and where can people listen to your show?
You bet. My show's live on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. It streams live at www.the405media.com. The podcasts are always out there, and you can certainly follow me on Twitter at Pops Radio, because it's never a dull moment.
Oh no, it certainly never is. So anyway, sir, I want to thank you for coming on, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me on.
And again, folks, that was Scott Jones from Pissed Off Politically Speaking Radio, otherwise known as Pops Radio on Twitter, where you can follow him. Really, really great guy, folks, don't you think? He's been somewhat of a mentor to me over the past 3 years, along with my good friends Michael Hausum and Dan Sandini. And people always say to me, Sam, you have a lot of mentors in the conservative movement. And I always reply, well, I'm always aiming to learn. And folks, Scott is a great mentor to have. In fact, I'm going to be on his show on Pops Radio coming up here sometime in June. I don't know when yet. We haven't worked the day out specifically. but I will keep you guys posted as to when that is. And again, Scott Jones is just a terrific guy, and I recommend that everyone check out his radio show, Pissed Off Politically Speaking, on the 405 radio network. Alright folks, I want to thank you, the listener, for tuning into the program today. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Remember, we honor those who have fallen in battle. So it's not necessarily a happy occasion, but it is an occasion to remember. From all of us here at NGC Studios, have a good afternoon, good evening, or good rest of your day wherever you are. And God bless and God save this great nation. We will see you next time on the Whitfield Analysis.